Hey everybody, I'm Max from HackPrinceton. If you guys have ever been to HackPrinceton, you might know me as the guy who throws bananas at people. If you haven't been to HackPrinceton, then I guess that actually sounds weird, so don't worry about that. Cool, so I'm going to be talking about funding without the logo, potentially how you can get your university to sponsor your hackathon and how to build a long-term relationship with your university. By show of hands, how many people spend prior to their hackathon at least 5% of their time trying to secure sponsorship dollars? Should be everybody, right? How about 20% of your time? 30%? 40%? Who spends like more than half their time just trying to get money? Makes sense, right? Okay. So, my question I want to first address is university funding better or worse? So, and please enjoy these stock photos of someone doing something to do with business and someone doing something to do with school. So sometimes the university can have fewer strings attached, sometimes not. I would argue more often than not you have fewer strings attached when you go through university because you don't always have to deal with putting up logos or working with certain corporate needs. Sometimes it can be a time saver. Sometimes it's faster to go through university to get certain sources of funding than it is to deal back and forth with certain corporations. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't pursue corporate funding because I actually think it's very important to do so. But if you were to receive a large chunk of money from your university and instead be able to focus on corporations to get certain things like APIs or different tech needs with, I don't know, like Arduinos or whatever, it might save you a lot of time. So this is hard, though, because oftentimes universities are pretty reticent to be able to fund your hackathon, and sometimes people have pretty bad relationships with their universities. For example, Alexi was telling me that the first time they threw pen apps, they got $250 from the university. And like last night, for example, my roommate who goes to Penn State, he was telling me that he gets $0 from his university. Now, at Princeton, we worked really, really hard to make sure that we have been able to work with our university and try to get as much funding as possible. We are able to receive $18,000 of our $60,000 from the university. And we're really proud of that, but I don't think that's good enough. I think that we should be able to receive at least 50% of our funding from our university. And let's talk about how and why. So first, why would a university be motivated to give you funding? So inherently, the university wants to push its own agenda. That makes sense, right? But I'd argue that it's a lot harder to get funding when your hackathon is not in line with your university's goals. So what does your university want? There are some obvious generic things, right? So they want to get more girls and minorities on campus into engineering fields. That makes sense. They want to have sort of a community pride. For example, like when BitCamp won the fall season of MLH, they had this big awards ceremony, as Swift was talking about earlier, and all the administrators and department heads came down and were able to, shake Swift's hand and receive this nice big trophy. And they were really excited because that meant that BitCamp meant something more than just BitCamp. It meant that it was something that was part of the entire university. And that really was received super well within the university because it was about pride and community pride. Also, hackathons can be a recruiting tool. So for the admissions office, they somehow convince all you suckers to go to your universities. Well, they want to convince more suckers to do the same. So what they want to do is they could potentially use your hackathon as a way to encourage more people to come to your school. Additionally, for example, like community relations is another interesting one. Most people don't realize this, but your university has a relationship with whatever town it resides in or city. For example, at Princeton, we have to deal with the town of Princeton a lot, and the university actually is not on very good terms with the town. But when we threw our last hackathon, we worked with the mayor of Princeton to come and give a prize out for the best use of a hack that had to do with our town. And she was super pumped. She's going to throw her own hackathon for the town, and she wants us to work with them to do that. So that actually really improved the relationship between our hackathon and the city, which our administration was really happy about. My question to you is there a way to adapt to the needs of the university while still maintaining what you believe as important and your vision for your hackathon? And I believe that is definitely possible, and I think that it is something that needs to be talked about and potentially addressed. So I would encourage you, when you go back and you have your next hackathon meeting, to talk about, is there 5 specific things endemic to our specific university that we can look at and potentially manicure or adapt in a way in which it fits better in line with our university goals? Or when we have meetings with our university administrators, is there a way that we can pitch them in a certain way that maintains and builds that relationship? So let's look at this big picture. And again, my poor graphics, I apologize. I know that hackathons are not measured in velocity, but it looked good, and there was this nice little upward trend. It's not a hockey stick. I apologize. But let's look at the big picture of the importance of university funding. So first in the big picture, there are more hackathons happening every year, and the number of corporations that can give out money isn't necessarily increasing at the same rate. So also, as our quality of hackathons increases, the prices that we need to spend on our participants increases as well. So I would argue as more hackathons come about, the less corporate money there is to go around. And especially for smaller hackathons starting out, bigger corporations are starting to say, we're not going to fund your hackathon because you're small and just getting started. So I would argue that it is imperative that we at least build or start to grow this relationship with our university, because over time, 20 years from now, when corporate money might be spread a little thinner, you want to go to your university whose sole job it is to fund you, or they would never at least fund a different hackathon, and having that relationship is really important. Okay, so what else? So having this long-term relationship is both for the benefit of yourself and for the administration. Now, you don't have to go to your administration today and say, I want $10,000. That's not going to work. But understanding and building this relationship with your university can pay off in the long run. And we'll talk about that a little more in a bit. So who would you approach if you were to go to your university and try to ask for money? And granted that some hackathons don't get any money from the university and some universities hate the hackathons, but when you look at who to approach, don't think of it as I'm asking for money, but think of it as I'm building a relationship. So there's the obvious departments, right? There's like the computer science department, electrical engineering departments, engineering departments, like the dean of students. Those are all pretty regular things. But for example, who, show of hands, thinks that their English department would sponsor their hackathon? One. That's awesome. Cool. So it turns out that you actually could get your English department to sponsor, and there's a couple little things that you can do to approach them and potentially get them to do so. For example, you could put a spin on your hackathon that says, I would prefer if everyone who comes and makes hacks to do with something to do with English or something to do with medicine. And that's actually what PennApps did, I believe, where they put sort of a medical spin on their hackathon, and they were able to receive funding from the medical department. So thinking about ways to approach different departments or departments that wouldn't necessarily be asked or discussed with hackathons could actually yield good results. So that's why you can choose a department of your choice. Also, a lot of hackathons don't realize that most universities have external relations representatives. These are people who your university already has deals with for big companies like Pepsi and Coke and GE, or companies that don't typically fund hackathons, but they're already pouring millions of dollars into your university. So by going to your external relations representative and saying, you can give some of that money to the hackathon, and then you can go back to Coke and say, we've taken your products and we put it in hackathon X, Y, or Z. And that, I think, will go a long way and is someone to approach. And also when to approach. You obviously don't want to approach an administrator in the middle of exam period or when they're first setting their budget. You want to get to them in advance and at a time in which it's appropriate for them. And so it's important to think about that too. Okay. So you can also contact your USG representatives, so your student government. I think a lot of people don't realize that their student government has a great relationship with the administrators at your school, and oftentimes if you approach one of them and ask them to help out, they're much more willing to give money and help you guys to fund your event. Okay, so let's see. So let's talk about finding your champion. So one of the things I really want to stress is that there is always and should be one person within your administration who loves your hackathon to death and is willing to throw themselves on the train tracks to help your hackathon. And this person could be someone at the very lowest level or the very highest level, it doesn't matter. But as long as you have someone, quote unquote, behind enemy lines who's willing to fight for you, it can really, really go a long way. So I would like everyone to think about who in their school is their champion, which administrator is willing to fight the hardest for them. And if that person, or if the person you think it is, isn't fighting hard enough, go and look for someone else, because maybe it's an English professor, maybe it's someone random, but someone who can go to their fellow peers and say, we need to work with this group to fund or work toward improving their hackathon is great. So think about who your champion is going to be. For example, at Princeton, there's this awesome lady named Claire Gamakel, and she's an awesome lady, super into lasers, really cool stuff, side note. She's head of Princeton's School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And she is so willing to help us that she said that she would personally give us $5,000 if her department didn't. And so we have built that relationship over a period of many years. She is awesome. We work with her all the time. But it's really important to get there early and to start learning about your professors and figuring out which ones enjoy and will be willing to support your hackathon. Okay, so I actually wrote a blog post last night. I posted it. It's the first blog post I ever put up, but it's with 10 tips and tricks on how to specifically approach administrators, go to my Medium page and you can check that out for specifics on how exactly to approach that. For example, I wrote things about how to get your university president to come to your hackathon, the benefits of handwritten thank you notes, and the top secret trick that I called the winner winner chicken dinner. You can check that out if you want. Okay, so let's see. So what I want to do is I want to create Hackcon for administrators. I really believe that it's super important to get these administrators starting to think about the importance of hackathons, and I want to help. I want your guys' help. I was talking to Alexei about this, and I'm actually going to call it the Academic Entrepreneurship and Innovation Conference. He was telling me that administrators don't like to go to exciting-sounding things like Hack in a Box, as I wanted to call it. But I'm working toward doing this in the next year, and I would love it if anybody would like to come give a talk a little bit about why hackathons are important and meaningful to the university, and to really push these buzzwords of like innovation and entrepreneurship and empower administrators to come through. Potential people that would come to this are your champions, the people who are already pushing for you, your administrators who, if you haven't started a hackathon yet, might be a little curious as to what exactly it entails, or, for example, people like heads of nonprofits or high schools who potentially could be getting into this avenue of putting on hackathons. Okay, so to end, and again, apologies for the hockey stick, not the lack of hockey stick, but it's really important to think about the long-term growth of hackathons. I think it's very easy to look at the short term and say we need to get $5,000 next month. But thinking ahead and saying 5-10 years from now, what is our relationship with our university going to look like, and how can we manicure and change that and work on that to make sure that in the long run we have a sustainable relationship and potentially can go to them when if the day comes when corporate sponsorships aren't as readily available. So just remembering that your long-term relationship is key and that finding a champion is very important are my two main points. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Let's do a couple questions. Repeat them into the mic.
Yeah.
What was your personal favorite stick that you did during the innovation at HackPrinceton?
The question was, what was my personal favorite shtick that I did during HackPrinceton? I was like the concluding ceremonies guy, so I did basically in between when people were plugging in their little things, I said really dumb jokes. Great jokes have been said here tonight. I would never be able to come up with such good jokes. No, so besides throwing bananas at people, I had a 5-pound bag of Haribo sugarless gummy bears, and I gave that out to, I think, the person wearing the most layers, which is a really stupid gimmick, but I really like throwing a 5-pound bag of gummy bears at people.
Are those the things with the reviews on Amazon?
Yeah, those are the things with the reviews on Amazon.